What you have to do is, in order to defeat Bitcoin, is you have to make it more and more centralized. A lot of people really don't have any financial experience or education whatsoever. There is competition to Bitcoin all day long, every single day. It has to run 24/7. It can't make a mistake. If there are other coins on its heels, Bitcoin cannot relax. It brings back a reliable measurement tape for value creation. Most of our cities in Europe and America, if we look at them, the beautiful architecture, all of what we see is from that period, the second half of the 19th century.
Do you see it as a big problem that mining is a specialized business, that it's maybe too centralized? We are both from Austria, am I right?
That's right. Yeah, my history is a little bit checkered, but I did grow up in Austria. I was born in East Germany in 78, but my parents fled East Germany, and my grandfather is Austrian, so I was raised from second grade until finishing high school in Austria, Vienna.
Okay, and then you moved when to America? Like you're in Florida right now,
Well,
right?
I spent some years. Yeah, I spent some years in Asia after high school, graduating in Vienna, and then after a couple of years, I came back to Germany and studied their computer science in Göttingen and Rostock. Focused on AI, which is funny in hindsight. Especially, my subject was computational linguistics. So the idea that language will be very important for achieving AI. And so, like, I'm looking at this whole large language model system, and I'm like, this is funny. This is kind of coming back full circle. But I left for the United States in 2007. I had a job in Hamburg as a junior software engineer, actually not junior at that point anymore, but software engineer, and then left for the United States.
And why did you leave? Is there like
Um, I'll tell you, this actually is a little bit related to what we're talking about. So my time in Asia was very formative. Obviously, people were. This is the late '90s. People were very optimistic about the future, very forward-looking. They still had a very traditional family model in most Asian countries. So you came from Europe and you just fell into these large families, healthy society structures, but also very pro tech, pro advancements of the human condition. And then I came back to study in Germany, and it was like a 180-degree difference. Everybody was negative. Everybody was full of self-hate towards themselves, towards society, towards the future, very critical about technology. And I felt like an alien. I mean, obviously, jumping between Austria and Germany back and forth as a child, I always felt kind of part of both. And then being in Germany and looking at everything and working, I didn't feel at home at all. But having had this exposure, I really thought my children, which at that point I had two young sons, I wanted them to grow up in an English-speaking country and in an environment that was positive when it comes to technology and advancements, and let people talk and think and create any way they wanted. And so I had some relatives in the U.S. and traveled there a couple of times, and then met some friends, and they were about to start a startup, and they invited me over. So I said, like, yeah, that's a great opportunity, and that's what I did.
and you came to an interesting time, like 2000, what was it, 9?
2007, actually. So this was when the subprime mortgage crisis hit the ceiling. So
Yeah.
we were driving around trying to find houses, and it was like a tiny little wooden shack, and they were selling it for $600,000. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? This makes no sense. And then you would go to the bank, and there's like, okay, yeah, you can have a credit line of $100,000. Go ahead. And it just didn't seem to make any sense whatsoever. And on hindsight, this was obviously the second bubble after the internet .com bubble that had impacted me, actually, after college. And yeah, it was interesting. So I did some stock market trading at the time too. I saw the whole meltdown, and the company that I was hired for, they went into receivership. They went bankrupt. So I was afloat there for a while, and then started another company with a different friend, and that's when I discovered Bitcoin in 2011, 12.
Oh, 11, 12 is really early. I think, like we have so many people that now like heard about Bitcoin and they have so many misconceptions about Bitcoin in their head and they still don't get it and they need to get over so many hurdles. Like, how did you get it so early?
Well, so I'll tell you, like for me, it wasn't even early enough. I was pretty frustrated at the time about it because the main source of my news consumption at the time was Hacker News, which is that Y Combinator news website, originally started in Silicon Valley, and it's like a originally software engineering insider news platform focused on startups. I went to some of their conferences, and I found the brightest, most intelligent people with very thought through comments would comment regularly on that site. And any new technology that came along had a very profound discussion typically on there. But there was a lot, and so you couldn't stay up to date all the time. And I missed the first mentioning of Bitcoin on there, unfortunately. So in 2011 was like the second or third time someone mentioned Bitcoin, and the discussion was very interesting. So I pulled up the white paper, and given my computer science background, I kind of read through it, and I thought the Byzantine generals' solution to the problem of decentralized networking, I thought that was amazing, that was great, and it came not from academia, it came from someone outside the academia, and he basically not just left it with a white paper, he actually implemented a basic version of this concept. And so I showed it to my co-founder at the time. I said, like, look at this. That's pretty cool. We should try it out. We should just see what we can do with this. And he turned around and said, like, Leonard, let me tell you something. This is America. We call this a Ponzi scheme. And I said, like, I know what a Ponzi scheme is. This is not quite a Ponzi scheme. This is something else, especially looking at the technology at the time. So we started downloading the reference implementation. I don't even know what it was, like point 18, point 16, whatever, early, one of the very early versions. And Bitcoin was trading around $1, I think, or maybe less than $1. And we mined it. CPU mining was still possible a little bit, not much. It had kind of just moved to GPU mining. So we let it run on all our laptops and computers wherever there was a graphic card. We started buying some graphic cards, and we actually got into mining to the point where we were considering this to be a serious endeavor of ours. Uh, at the time, we were running a software company, kind of focused more on email marketing and that kind of thing. And we looked for some investors, but every time I ran these calculations on mining profitability, you know how this goes. It's you put the money in, you buy some mining equipment, and then you have to wait a year or something before you see a return of your investment uh, at the current Bitcoin rate. So either you believe strongly that Bitcoin is going to go up, and or that power prices are going to fall. But regardless, once you make that profit, your equipment is outdated, and you have to pour all that money back into mining if you kind of want to keep staying competitive. And so we were looking at it and we decided against it. But we had already a little fleet of computers mining. Yeah. In general, I think the problem that I saw with my background, particular on the one hand, my family is very libertarian. My dad was a huge anti-communist, as you can imagine, having been born in East Germany and fleeing there. My problem was that I thought the government, if it really understood Bitcoin, would have to shut it down as fast as possible, because if it didn't shut it down, it would take over. And to me, that was apparent in 2011, 12. So I was thinking that there are smart people in government and they will shut it down.
It's interesting for me because there was a point like in the early days where it could have been shut down.
Yeah.
And I think we have now reached a point where it's near impossible outside of a crazy black swan event where it cannot be shut down. And you are involved so early in this project. when do you think did we reach that point of no return where Bitcoin was just out of the bottle and not even China with their strategies to get rid of it, like or the US cannot shut it down? Like, first of all, do you think we are above this point where we cannot shut it down? And then, like, when did we reach it?
Yeah, yes and no. So in a way, I think for me personally, 2016 felt like 16, 17 felt like a pivotal point in kind of the spread of Bitcoin. It really reached a very different layer of user base, and in that time frame, a lot more widespread than the kind of nerdier parts that I was involved in the early couple of years. And so if it's that widespread, it's getting really, really hard for the government to do anything because, in part, even the congressmen and politicians, they all had Bitcoin. They all have Bitcoin. I remember we went to one of the very first Bitcoin outreach days here in Tallahassee, which is the capital of Florida. And I believe it was 2000, don't quote me on it, 2018 or so. And we met with a lot of congressmen and senators and politicians. Every time we sat in the waiting room to meet another representative, the ladies there would ask us, what is the best wallet? What exchange can they sell or buy different coins? And where do we think Bitcoin is going to go? And that was 2018. So I realized at the point, this is the mycelium of Bitcoin has made it so far. There's probably no way for even politics to stop it or outrule it. However, having said that, there is an ability to slow capture Bitcoin. And because I think most of what the system does to competition is more like a Sun Tzu attack, a deceptive one. When you can snuff out certain things very early, but you have to be very early and you have to be very firm to do that. Very often these systems are sluggish and they don't react that fast. Maybe in an authoritative state like Iran or China or something, which actually happened if we think of China, right? That's what they realized at some point. That's what they did. But usually, I think what happens in the West is a hijacking, a a very slow creep into the system. KYC comes to mind as kind of one of the biggest ways to kind of curtail Bitcoin's inherent nature of free exchange. And so at this point, the blockchain has been analyzed and is being analyzed. The on and off ramp is totally KYC'd. And so and all the banking laws and financial laws fully apply to Bitcoin and any Bitcoin company that operates in the US and in Europe. So there's really no exemption at this point in any form or fashion. And the benefits that Bitcoin brings to the table, besides the store of value, are much harder to take advantage of in this environment. And I believe if things would have gone a little bit differently, especially if the financial sector and the political sector weren't so closely connected with each other, Bitcoin would have probably already won. If this was like a completely free competition, it probably would have taken over the banking and financial system entirely.
So you're saying that KYC is kind of a slow attack on
One of the
Bitcoin.
many, yeah, one of the many ways to slow the progress of it down. You try basically what you have to do is in order to defeat Bitcoin is you have to make it more and more centralized. Your system is centralized, and now you're competing with a system, which is not necessarily bad, right? A centralized system, a centralized database does have many advantages. First and foremost, it's fast and it's cheap, but it has the problem of trust and control. And the main advantage of Bitcoin, the decentralized, trustless nature of it, is one that is really only beneficial in certain aspects of life. And that's when you have to deal with a lot of humans, a lot of power, and you want to make sure that that doesn't get abused. And there are certain cases in life where you do want a trustless system. A government comes to mind. That is a public good that comes with a lot of power, that you do want to be as decentralized and as trustless as possible because you don't want anyone to be able to take it over and control it for their own purpose. Money is another one. Maybe insurance would be another one. Maybe notarization, digital notaries is another one. So there's certain aspects where the public wants to make sure that not one individual group owns and controls it. And yeah, so I think the more Bitcoin gets pushed into centralization, the less its benefits are apparent. So that's, I think, has been the attack vector ever since the beginning of, when they realized it can't be turned off.
Is the Bitcoin ETF part of it? Like, is Bitcoin ETF like they also trying to infiltrate it, trying to like centralize Bitcoin holdings?
Yeah, I get. I mean, obviously, and I think for everyone probably in the audience has read the Bitcoin Standard, and those who haven't read the Bitcoin Standard, it's a highly recommended book to read. History of money in general, the history of the gold standard in particular, and then how Bitcoin kind of plays into that as a new version of the gold standard, if you will. And if you look at the playbook, the gold standard was amazing. There may be an argument for our entire modern way of life. If you think about humans existed as an agricultural society for well, at least since the beginning, the dawn of history, since the forming of cities around agricultural societies. So for 10,000 years, let's say, we've basically existed in an agricultural life where most of the progress revolved around maybe some city architecture. That's it. And then we have the Renaissance and Newton coming along and the forming of the gold standard. You can put that somewhere around 1600 something. When was it? 1660, 1670. And all of a sudden, the next 300 years, you see an explosion in technology and innovation and capital formation, something that's never existed before, that actually makes us sit here talk on a computer. And I think gold was probably a big part of it, if not the only one. And the reason is because you need that metric system of value communication to communicate between humans what is expensive, what is hard to automate currently, what is takes up more resources, and what is very easy and what is very simple to accomplish. And if nobody can mess with the ruler, then we can measure our social interactions with each other, and prices come to be. And the prices tell us basically there's a huge inefficiency in this area, and we can all attack it. We will attack it because it will bring us profits if we do. And if we succeed, the prices should start to fall. And if the prices fall, they benefit everyone in society. And so if we're all using the same ruler, the same measurement tape, if I improve the production of clothing in one area, you're going to benefit because now you can dress yourself and you can save all the time and effort that you had before on creating your own garment, and apply that extra time that you gained and attack another inefficient part of life. And so society, I think, saw this spiral upward where everyone became wealthier and wealthier until about 1913. I think there's a certain inertia in these systems. Obviously, it continued a while. But I think for the last 50 years, especially in the regulated areas, we've seen a certain stagnation. And especially in the last 10, 20 years, the paper printing has gone completely nuts. And as most people are familiar with at this point, paper printing was originally a receipt on gold. So we've
Hmm.
taken that ruler and we've artificially added another ruler, and that is actually just a rubber band that can be stretched infinitely. And so we've lost a lot the ability to take advantage of trustworthy monetary systems.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people also fear that the same thing could happen to Bitcoin with layer 2, 3, 5 solutions, or even like with Bitcoin ETF and stuff like that.
Yeah, sorry for kind of ranting, but that's actually where I wanted to go. So I had a conversation the other day with a trust company, actually a trust fund. A lot of them have been involved since the FTX blow up destroyed a little bit the relationship between banks and Bitcoin. In 2020, there was still it actually was like a big marriage between Bitcoin and banking. It was beautiful to see. I was at one conference, you had big banks promoting Bitcoin and Bitcoin companies promoting banks. So it was actually really fascinating, actually mind blowing. And then FTX happened. a couple of months later after this conference, and took down that relationship, froze it over, brought a nice excuse for the regulators to separate the kind of emerging integration. And what happened now is you have conversations like the one I just recently had, where it goes like, well, you can park all your Bitcoin with us, and it's very heavy, it's very difficult to move. Um, if you once you park it with us, and all the ETFs do, and all the big banks do, it's all sitting here with us. Uh, then you can just use our API system to shovel money back and forth between each other, on our rails, on our internal system, and you don't ever have to touch Bitcoin. So we basically make sure that it's efficient. And that causes obviously a concern, because if you look at the history, that's exactly what happened with gold. Everybody started parking their gold in central places. Paper receipts were issued. The paper receipts were supposed to be exchangeable for Bitcoin, for gold, one to one, and then it kind of took off from there. So there's a certain danger that with secondary, tertiary layers, you disconnect from the actual money, the one that everyone says is the one that they trust, um, and you walk away from the non-custodial aspect to a custodial aspect.
Yeah, and then I think there's always a drawback with technology. Like you can never have like a perfect piece of technology. Everything has like the small disadvantages that basically cannot be the perfect solutions, because of course it would be perfect if Bitcoin with the decentralization and the security also is scalable on the base layer and is also really
Yeah,
fast and cheap and stuff like that.
yeah.
But you need, of course, the drawbacks to have the advantages.
Yeah, and so that's obviously, I think it's still an ongoing conversation, and it will probably follow us for a while. I'm always fascinated by people and projects that try to tackle this fundamental problem. You could say it's a fundamental problem of a decentralized network, having to communicate across the globe and settle within minutes, and make it scalable on each transaction, while allowing people to hold their private keys directly and be super efficient and super inexpensive. So I do think we shouldn't give up on this. We should keep looking into it. It's just too important not to have, or not to be able to solve. There have been hundreds, if not thousands, of papers in the cryptography kind of space. It's really interesting actually to follow and look at some of the breakthroughs. But I do think experimentation shouldn't stop, and Bitcoin itself, the protocol itself, should look at this and see if it can evolve further. And obviously, I've been there when Bitcoin blockchain forked, the block wars happened, and then I was pretty close to all of that. So yeah, I'm definitely on the side of experimentation and keeping an open mind.
Definitely. How was that 2017 block size war? It's like I unfortunately came to Bitcoin in 2020, so I only hear
Yeah.
from people telling me how it was. How was that area?
Yeah, so it was actually interesting because I was so focused on building our business by Federal at that time. So I was actually, you mentioned this. It's really beautiful. I had this moment yesterday in the office. I just took a step back and said, like, it's amazing that we're allowed to kind of work on this amazing technology every single day, and I don't really take that for granted at all. It's really a beautiful thing to be able to do. So appreciate our customers and the co-workers and everything that's been built. And having said that, 2016 is when I started Byte Federal, and 2017 was our first year in business. And it was really extremely brutal, because you are trying to build something in a space where you have to deal with regulations and the regulators that don't know anything about the technology. You have to deal with banks that don't want anything to do with you and see you as a competition. And then you have the early Bitcoin crypto technology that you have to kind of implement and make sure that it works for customers. So we were right there. So the focus was more on kind of building the business than anything else. But I saw it kind of from the sidelines, and honestly, at the time, even the conversation about Bitcoin as stored value, Bitcoin as a transactional medium of exchange, that wasn't all that settled. Most of our Bitcoin up until I'd say 2017, 18 were actually spent because we believed that we had to spend them to show the public and the world that Bitcoin is usable in daily life. So a lot of very active Bitcoiners from that time, they would not sit on, on their thousands of Bitcoin. They would mine them and they would spend them. They would maybe buy and sell, trade a little bit but very often they would talk to businesses, local business owners, and say like, let me set you up with BitPay. Let me show you how you can actually implement it. And then we would spend in order to show that it's actually a feasible technology. So when the cost of transactions started to rise, this was a big issue, it was a big problem, and Lightning didn't even exist, and was just an academic paper. So I found myself in the camp of big blocks. I wanted the transactions to be cheap. I had very often argued that Bitcoin should be used for micro payments, and obviously the discussion ended up being, well, then not everyone can run a node when the nodes get really, really big. Um, and it's a decentralization issue. But at the same time, the mining had already I'd already experienced that. Not everyone could mine. Mining had already become a specialized business. And there was always a worry that you could lose control over the network, either by having, a few data center running all the blocks, or a few data centers running all the mining and then having control over it. And I just watched this discussion, and the hope was the second layer would solve these problems. And Lightning has to a certain degree, but it has also inherent issues and problems too. So it's not. I don't see this as a solved. I don't see this as a solved problem yet.
Yeah, it's definitely not. And I see also a lot of problems. Like there's like at least 4 or 5 layers we discussed already on the podcast. You are my 98th guest. So you can imagine that we had a lot of different discussions, a lot of
Mhm.
different directions already with 98 different guests in the topic of Bitcoin. And the interesting part is that we all kind of agree that we need that base layer. And we
Mhm.
all kind of agree that we need a scaling solution. And
Yeah.
most in the Bitcoin community, and I think almost everybody in on my podcast agree that we have to scale through layers, like we did in the internet with the TCP/IP protocol and stuff like that. But there's even like the mining argument. I hear that also more and more, that mining is getting too centralized. I mean, in 2021, there was like, before 2021, there was a lot of mining in China. Now they kind of broke that down, and now there's at least not 70% of mining power in China. This was always a big argument before that. Do you see it as a big problem that mining is a specialized business, that it's maybe too centralized?
No. Honestly, no. I don't. I used to see it as a problem. I don't anymore. I think it's more important to have this huge hash rate protecting the network, making it really hard to roll back. I see it as a bigger problem if all of your hashing power is in one country. If it's if it's 70% is in China or 70% is in the United States, that's probably a bigger thing, a bigger issue. And I'm given my kind of open-mindedness and all of these things, I don't even mind contemplating really radical things. There are coins out there, some of the old proof of work coins that not proof of stake. I think is a wrong direction, because it is so relatively easy to take over. That's my issue with proof of stake. The government can print as many funds as they want and try to gobble up enough of the network in terms of coins to then influence the validator nodes. With mining, it's a little bit harder, or let's say a lot harder. You need the infrastructure, technology, power, and so on and so forth. Um, but I wouldn't even mind changing the hashing algorithm every couple of years to break down the ASIC machinery and bring mining back to GPU or CPU level. Obviously, right now in Bitcoin, it's almost impossible because it would destroy a multi-billion-dollar industry and just completely upset them. Ethereum did it, obviously, because they went for staking, which I think was wrong. I don't think you should go for staking. I think you should decentralize the mining as much as possible. And if every laptop can mine in the background good luck for a government to take over there. That's going to be very, very tricky. If you have a couple of big mining pools, it's a different story. You could infiltrate them potentially, and you have some power at that point. But in general, it is. I think it's much harder. So, but we could change the hashing algorithm if we wanted to. Other proof of work coins have done it, and of course, it's a hard fork. It's a download, which is difficult for a network like Bitcoin with tens of thousands of nodes.
I told you a lot about 21 Bitcoin, the best place for me to buy Bitcoin directly on a Bitcoin only exchange. But now let's talk about how to secure your Bitcoin. Once you got Bitcoin, you don't want to leave them on exchange. You want to take self custody. You want to take responsibility of your own Bitcoin. That's why I recommend getting a BitBox. BitBox is an amazing wallet where you can not only keep your Bitcoin in a simple way, very secure, you can even create a passphrase. With that passphrase, you can basically create a hidden wallet on the device itself. Make sure to buy your BitBox in the link down in the description, and with code Robin, you even get a 5% discount. There's always this discussion. I think 5 or 6 guests ago, someone said like we should not touch Bitcoin too much now and develop more on the layers above it, which is also interesting. But I think we should always try to experiment, but with experimentation, try to not break it. It's like
Yeah. So okay. So that you're bringing up a good point. So even having said the experimentation, right? Honestly, I like actually that argument very much. I personally, I would not have touched Bitcoin's core code, let's say after 2015, 14, 15. Bug fixes is a different story, but I would not have changed the protocol. In fact, I probably would have the dynamic blocks. I think that's a cool idea because the more transactions you have, the more you can immediately compete with Visa and all the other ones, whatever. But I do see the argument for layer two as well. But in general, I would not have tinkered with it, and I wouldn't want to change it too much because it very much mentioned TCP/IP. The TCP/IP protocol is from the 70s.
hmm.
We're not touching it. And so the experimentation I think would be in I guess new forms, new coins around it, side chains or whatever else. If something turns out to be like breakthrough technology, huge advantage, Bitcoin would probably take that over and take that on into incorporate it into its own core as one massive TCP/IP, if you will, upgrade. But that might happen only every 5 or 10 years. And in the meantime, you have a very stable protocol that everyone can build on. Everyone can, kind of build their businesses on. And then, if there's really some groundbreaking new technology, you shift to it. And heck, I wish we had voting on the blockchain because then we could make actually decisions as well. Maybe people who had a certain amount of Bitcoin could vote on the future of the protocol itself. But obviously, there you have to be careful too. Yeah, swap
It's
is really
interesting for me because when we look at the history of money, money evolved obviously a lot. We had like different forms of money, with like stones, with gold, and with now fiat. And obviously, when you have read the Bitcoin standard, you know about the history. And I think most of the people listening had read the Bitcoin standard. Then when we think of now and when we like think of the next 50 years where Bitcoin could potentially be the next evolution of money and it's becoming the dominant monetary base layer, which we then have a dominant monetary base layer that we could try to tinker with, try to change when we find something completely new that's better. Because why did gold fail as money? Because we were globalized more. It was too heavy. Like there were drawbacks to it. But when we discovered drawbacks to Bitcoin in like 50, 100 years, we could theoretically, I don't know if it's practical, then change Bitcoin for that to make still sense in the future. How do you see like could potentially Bitcoin be the end goal of money?
No, I don't. I'm a I'm such a libertarian pro market person. I don't think there's an end. There shouldn't be an end to markets and optimization. It might get incorporated into something else. It might, even if you think of Bitcoin, there's certain features of Bitcoin that are taken from gold as an inspiration, if you will. So I don't think ideas necessarily die. Good ideas don't die. They have a place, even if it's just in the pantheon of the past of good ideas, and they kind of guide us in the future, decision making in the future. So um, I don't think it's the I think it's the end of monetary evolution, but it is definitely a complete paradigm shift. And if anything, Bitcoin actually lives in a very interesting environment, because it is being there is competition to Bitcoin all day long, every single day. It has to run 24/7. It can't make a mistake, if you will. There are other coins on its heels, if you will. Most of them will die. Most of them will not even maintain the value as Bitcoin does. But Bitcoin cannot relax, if you will. If Bitcoin makes if the Bitcoin core developers or whatever make a fundamental mistake, the community can just switch from one to the other overnight. And so I find this hilarious, because the banking system is so freaked out now that the settlement times become faster and faster. They're like, oh my God, people can take their money out of one bank and move it to another bank overnight. It's going to bankrupt us. Yes, that's the point. If you're making a mistake, if your bank does not work properly, yes, you should be bankrupt. But so should be the government, if you will, or so should be the municipality, or it should be any other inefficient place, corrupt environment that does not take good care of someone's funds or future. So no, I think this is actually really, really a beautiful environment that Bitcoin finds itself in, that it has to compete constantly. And at the same time, what would really stop us from absorbing certain new technologies that come along? One good example is, for instance, quantum computing resistance. There's probably some upgrades that will happen, that will come into Bitcoin, and maybe some other coins experimenting with it right now, which I think actually they are. So yeah.
Definitely, and this idea, like when people ask me, "Oh, what do you do when Bitcoin fails?" I'm like, "Okay, then I was wrong about Bitcoin, but I'm still right about the fundamental values that I talk about with the libertarian view, with the
Absolutely, and I think right, and I think I agree with you. I think we have to separate those two things. Like Bitcoin is a technology, right? So Bitcoin shouldn't necessarily become. I mean, we can make it our religion. That's fine. It's almost like, for me, it's almost a religion, because I I work, sleep, and breathe it. But in generally, the impact of Bitcoin, what it actually can do and does to society, that is the amazing. That's the fascinating part. The ability to notarize, for instance, anything, any activity of human that's important for public consumption, that outsources almost all of our government. I mean, funny enough, we really haven't been there and haven't even experimented with these parts yet. And this is, one of my experiments. People can go into my history and they can check it out. They'll find it relatively quickly. I did publish 2 research papers in the last 2 years on voting, because it's very close to my heart. And we're experimenting also on another coin, in my case, a Mars coin, with it. But the technology itself can easily be implemented on Bitcoin, and there might be even a Bitcoin version for it. But when you do anything on Bitcoin, you get immediately kind of close scrutiny, which, especially when it comes to voting, is better if you can experiment elsewhere. But the basic fact is that the blockchain technology itself, and the hashing and mining supporting the individual blocks and making it near impossible to roll back, makes it a perfect system for decentralized voting. And there's an algorithm that we were looking at closer, which is called the coin shuffle algorithm. It's similar to a coin join, but not exactly the same. And a coin shuffle algorithm will be perfect, or will be a great way to test it, where individual citizens, the voters, if you will, are, like every country has a voter registry right now, where you can kind of look up your name and that that person exists. It's actually a citizen. Um, and then you can take that, if you have that on the blockchain, and you can let them vote. And the votes themselves get anchored into the blockchain. So there is a very clear trace of someone from the pool of voters cast a vote. You don't know who it was. You can see that they voted, and the outcome of that election is uh, auditable or is countable within fractions of a second. So you could see a future where all of us, our voting, our titles, our house titles, our car titles, everything is on blockchain. And you walk into a house, you like the house, you buy it, title shifts over the blockchain to you. You sell something, titles move around, insurance gets adjusted. Maybe even borrowing works, maybe better than it did with Celsius or some other companies. But you have all of these interactive features reflected on the blockchain, and I think that's a future that we're looking at. So it's going to be fundamentally not just changing finance, but also the public interactions, the civic interactions in general.
And that's interesting. Like this is the area where I'm not as deep into that because I'm just not researching it too much. I'm like now really focused on Bitcoin and the monetary aspect
Yeah.
and this one. But there could be really interesting parts. The question that I always ask myself is the oracle problem. If you have something on the blockchain, you have to get it somewhere up. So like there has to be some kind of process to it, which is not in Bitcoin, but there could be somewhere else. But it's an interesting field, and I'm, as you said, also a really big proponent of just a free market, because if it is something, it will catch on for the long run, and it will accrue to value. In the short run, everything can accrue to short-term value and get some trends or bumps up, and but it will come down eventually if it has no real value to the people. Because even with art, for example, I don't get why people pay millions or even more than that for like some pictures on the wall. I personally don't get it. But obviously, when someone is willing to pay that money, it has some value for somebody. I don't want to tell him that he cannot do that just because I don't get it. And this is where a lot of the debates in Bitcoin and in crypto also come in there, because if it has value, then obviously it has some kind of utility. I always try to be completely Bitcoin only, and I also try to not promote anything else, because there are a lot of scams and a lot of fishy things going on in the crypto economy, and I just don't want to get involved in this. And I always, like, I think I published today the episode where I said I try to educate people on Bitcoin, but if they still try to get into some scam, they deserve to learn. Like they just deserve
Yeah.
to learn their lesson in there.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I noticed too. A lot of people really don't have any financial experience or education whatsoever. And I also wonder where that came from. Maybe, the regulation and the government's interference in markets, in my mind, are problematic, to say the least. And it's always done to protect or for safety. But what it really ends up, besides being not very successful for the most part, and usually putting a burden on the people that are actually good already. I think the other problem that it does create is a mentality shift. It ends up creating human beings that are extremely vulnerable, that have a very distorted view of the world, and yeah, period. And in investments is a good example. When the stock markets, it's beautiful. The history of the golden age here, the gilded age, the most of our cities in Europe and America, if we look at them, the beautiful architecture, all of what we see is from that period, the second half of the 19th century. If you really, really walk around and take a look at that, a lot of it comes from that period of time, especially the individual. Not, I mean, the kings, they were always able to build something beautiful in the past with a lot of slave labor, but you had this period where the gold standard really allowed individuals to build wealth within their families, and they spend it on beautiful architecture, art, whatever. And I think when you look at how they interacted with each other in the stock market, there was nobody protecting anybody from anything. You had banks defaulting left and right, taking down a certain amount of investors for a certain period of time, but the general public became wealthier and so more self-reliant, I think, over time. And this creating this bubble around people and not teaching them how to even vet investments because you're saying you have some agency protecting them and going after scams. Sure, you can do that, and that's fine. But why not let the free market create auditing firms, free market auditing firms, free market certification processes, where instead of having a regulator who gets captured maybe by someone coming out of a scammy industry, you have companies vest or vet other companies, and I think that would be a healthier way of dealing with scams, and it would probably also produce people that are a little bit more informed and don't necessarily fall for every silly scam that comes along.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also like when I think of the current world where we try to regulate everything. I mean, it's a little bit different maybe in America, but it's like the saying America innovates, China copies, and the EU is regulating it, which is also a little bit true. A little bit, it's very true actually, in my view. And Bitcoin then brings the free market to a certain extent back because it
Yeah,
forces people to do it. It's like Bitcoin, the dream of an Austria economics. It's like the is
yeah,
that
it is, isn't it? But it also shows you the reverse is true too. It shows you by how much it's regulated. It's like a temperature measurement of your own society and of your own government. The heavier it's regulated, the more it's suppressed, the more you know you live in an unfree society.
mm,
That's my opinion. I think the United States in the last, well, since I've been here, has tried to catch up with Europe as fast as they can, which I don't think is a good idea at all. Hence, now the innovation is, with some exceptions, seems to be leaving to China, and that's not a good thing either. Neither for Europe nor for America. So we'll see. It's an interesting story, and you and I are in the middle of it.
yeah, absolutely. What do you think currently of the European Union and Bitcoin stance?
Um, well, I don't know too much about the Mika regulation that was put in place. I know that in we've looked into European regulation quite a bit a couple of years ago. We had some attorneys look through the different regulations in especially in the German speaking countries because I was curious to see what it would take to kind of replicate our business model over there, and it's been always doable. And actually, in fact, even a few years ago, I think it was easier than it was in the United States because when we started out, in many ways, there was no regulation whatsoever, um, and you just had to. Well, typical for America, you just had to seek the conversation and you had to just try and experiment. In Europe, very quickly, you had rules. They came out of nowhere. They were there, and that's fine. The rules are okay, but they usually come with a lot of money involved in it, so it keeps out the ordinary people from starting something new, which is unfortunate. And that's, I think, my general view on the on Europe and European regulation. Um, by trying to order society, which can have its benefits, you're also putting in a threshold that kills off innovation, and you really be darn sure that that's a good trade-off, because in the end you may end up with an order that suffocates people.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like so interesting to see, as you said before, when we see the time we are right now alive and can live through and see what's happening. And then we can see states like Europe, states like America. Then we see small country experimenting with Bitcoin, like El Salvador, which they are having a lot of interesting things going on, even beyond Bitcoin. For example, that Nayib Bukele is now giving out free passports for skilled people. He's really trying to get capital and talents in the in the country. It's like, do you see El Salvador as one of the role models when it comes to Bitcoin adoption, or is there any other country where you say like this should be the role model?
Let's put it this way: El Salvador really was at the bottom of the list of all the countries. You couldn't really go lower than they were. with the crime and the poverty and everything. It's good for them, good for Nayib Bukele to come in and try to change. So almost anything rational that he does at this point just keeps lifting the country up. I actually, just before our call, as one of our colleagues posted a video, just a big Google building headquarter or whatever was built and
Mm.
launched in El Salvador. So there, it's beautiful. It's good for them. I'm really happy for them. Honestly, I wish America and Europe would be on a completely different trajectory, that we had a free economy, completely free economy, with hardly any regulation, that our governments would only invest in military and police and make sure that they're not attacked from the outside and that there's civil order on the inside, but to get the hell out of the way of the individuals and let them actually build and create and fail and go to prison if they so choose. Um, but other than that, I think we have in many ways given up on the dreams that were very strong in the 50s, 60s, maybe even 80s. You see maybe a lot of space books behind me. I was raised in the 80s that by this time I'd be on the moon, Mars. There'll be flying cities in the sky. So in many ways, we've kind of shot ourselves in the foot several times over. And I'm very happy for China discovering capitalism. And that was good for them. But us taking our jobs in factories and manufacturing and intellectual property and just shipping it over was a very big mistake. No problem helping the Chinese get up and develop like we should the rest of the world. But at the same time, I think we shouldn't lose focus on the history and culture and civilization that was built in America and Europe, and supercharge it, not dismantle it. And I think part of the fear of the future is seen in regulation. Um, and very often I wonder if it is maybe actually a second order effect of an aging society, that by having less children and investing less into your own personal future, you have an aging society that tries to protect the past and make sure the peace in the retirement home is not disturbed. So the more regulations you have and the more warnings to make sure the kids shut up, the safer the elderly are. But I don't think that's a way to embrace the future or build something incredibly wonderful to be proud of.
Yeah, it's also interesting when you see the birth rates, and we kind of get problems when people not make enough babies. Then we kind of die, right?
Yeah, I know this is often thrown at capitalism, this endless greed or whatever, but my argument usually is like, look, have you read one astronomy book? Yeah, the universe is big. Nobody ever said we need to be confined on one planet. In fact, we shouldn't. It's like, you're floating on this tiny little speck through space. It's not going to last forever. The biosphere is not going to be unchanged forever. That would be a insane assumption. So we have a chance as thinking individuals to actually spread out over the solar system, take life to all the other planets. We could terraform Venus and Mars and turn them into secondary Earths. What system allows us to do that? It is technology, it's growth. It is actually capitalism that's even more anarchic and faster moving than anything we've seen so far. So I think the future of humanity is really bright, but you have to believe in that future. You have to invest in that future, and nobody knows exactly how it's going to look like. But I want to believe in a positive, optimistic way for humanity forward.
It's interesting what you said before, where you said like you imagined that we at this time already colonizing other planets, that we have flying cars, flying cities, and stuff like that. Is fear one of the, or maybe even like the main reason why we don't have innovation, or is like there's other reasons to it?
I follow very closely the website WTF 1971, which is closely related to Safdie's book. In fact, actually, before Safdien was done writing, I had this conversation with him, and Peter Thiel was pretty strong, outspoken on this very strange stalling of progress, especially in the West, since the 70s. Kind of, like there's a certain, I'll just say, inertia in all these systems, but something really strange because if you take someone from the 70s and drop them right into this place, okay, and what they're going to look at, like they see the cars, they more or less look the same. Maybe they're a little bit more water drop shaped. They're going to see the houses all look the same. In fact, actually, the houses are made out of cheaper materials in some cases. The cars are made out of cheaper materials in some cases, and the infrastructure looks more or less exactly the same. However, they won't see, maybe even some of the nuclear reactors have been shut down at this point. They won't see some of the bullet trains maybe turned off, whatever. But in general, the architecture infrastructure of the 70s and the 2020s in Europe and America is very, very similar, except for computers, cell phones, maybe some biomedical breakthroughs that have happened since then. So industries that have been left relatively unregulated have seen most of the breakthroughs and modernization, but the other industries that were heavily regulated seem to have been lacking and falling behind. And then when it comes to paper money, it's really interesting. Paper money allowed the government to blow up in proportion. It's insane. So this, the size of a government that we have in Europe and America, these people are hired, they have a job, and they need to keep themselves busy. So with a very big government, you just increase more bureaucracy, you create even more breaks on the system itself. We've seen this in history, it kind of keeps repeating itself. And I believe switching from a gold standard, completely disconnecting in 1971 was one of those pivotal moments that is probably responsible to a big degree, of seeing some of our progress being stifled, held back, and cost of living. If you think about it, we're just talking about families. If you want to have more children in the 50s, one person went to work and you had a house and you had 4 or 5 children, whatever. Now you have 3 people, 4 people working under the same roof, and the kids can't leave because they can't afford it. And yeah, so I do think money has to do with it, and I think Bitcoin plays a pivotal role in a bright human future by bringing that measurement tape back and allowing us to actually measure things precisely, indirectly, maybe even leading to a collapse of huge, gigantic bureaucratic structures because they can be outsourced, not outsourced, they can be outcompeted, or they can be unlocked. The capital that's locked up, that can be unlocked by automating it. But also, if the paper money flees into something like gold standard and Bitcoin, then these bureaucratic structures can't support themselves anymore because they're
Yeah,
basically supported on theft.
yeah, absolutely. And that's we have an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest, and the end routine is really nicely fitting now in our conversation actually. So I will switch now to the end routine, and the question is from the previous guest: what is your favorite thing that Bitcoin fixes?
I think it's exactly that. The thing I just mentioned. My favorite thing that it fixes is that it brings back a reliable measurement tape for value creation, and it reins in the production of paper money. And I think paper money was responsible for an overhead in government and regulation and actually technological decline. So that to me is the favorite thing, and that's why I wake up every day and I'm super excited to, work on Byte Federal and get more and more people a chance to flee the weak currency and get into the hard money.
Yeah, definitely. It's an amazing journey. I've been now, I think 5-6 weeks full time in Bitcoin. So I'm like still a junior in the full time Bitcoin working, but it's an amazing experience, and it's such an amazing thing. Stand up, work basically still till I cannot work anymore. Sleep and do the same thing the next day because
Yeah.
it's just so amazing, and it's a great experience. Lennart, it has been a pleasure talking with you. It has been a pleasure exchanging thoughts with you. Is there, when people want to get in touch with you, when people want to see what you're up to and ask you questions, where can people reach you in the best way?
Yeah, probably the best way is on Twitter, X, or on over our website. So the company itself is called Byte Federal, like computer byte, BYTE federal.com. You can reach me through the website there, or on Twitter. My handle is Novalis78. So that's more for the German speaking people. It's Novalis 78. Yeah, just hit me up if you want to ask me questions. But you can just Google my name too. There's, obviously, I have not hidden my identity at all. You can see my entire history reflected online.
Yeah, most of my guests actually are visible. I have four guests that are completely anonymous. They don't want to get anything out, which is also a noble act because they don't want any credit also. But it's most of the guests are like pretty visible, and I will also link your stuff in the description so people can see it. Then yeah, thank you for being on. Thank you for taking the
Thanks,
time.
Robin, for the interview. Very much appreciated.